Hello and welcome to this video for third year biology, which is going to be a quick review of photosynthesis. Just a wee recap on all the bits and pieces we did just before the Easter holiday. So you should know what photosynthesis is. Really, that it's the process of plants capturing the light energy from the sun in their leaves, and they convert this to chemical energy in food. So essentially what plants are actually doing is making glucose molecules by photosynthesis, and this is essentially a very simplified model of a glucose molecule here. And we can see we've got a few different elements in there. We've got some carbons, we've got some oxygens, and these little blue guys over here are some hydrogen molecules. So obviously the plant needs to be able to access those molecules from somewhere, and then it needs to break them down, and using the light energy that it's able to absorb from the sun, it can convert them into this form instead. And so to be able to get our carbon, our oxygen and our hydrogen, we need to be able to find some H2O or some water and some carbon dioxide. So where can the plant get those? Well, water obviously going to come from either the plant being watered by its grower or in nature coming from rain, and carbon dioxide obviously present in the air. So photosynthesis itself occurs in the leaves of plants. So the raw materials the plants are getting from the air and from the soil. We're getting some water coming up through from the soil, so obviously rainwater, or the plant being watered. That water is absorbed by the soil and allows the plant to get it through its roots and bring it up into the leaves. And we're able to get carbon dioxide from the air. So in order to turn those two materials into food, remember we're looking at those basic elements, water being hydrogen and oxygen, and carbon dioxide being the carbon and oxygen. We need to be able to break those down and convert them into our carbohydrate molecule. So in order to do that, we need some light energy from the sun to convert that carbon dioxide and water into food. So those are essentially the raw materials that we need for photosynthesis. We've got carbon dioxide and water, and then we've got the light energy coming in order to provide us with that energy. Now, within the plant cells, we have got specifically chloroplasts. These are little organelles, a bit like a nucleus, and that's where photosynthesis is actually going to take place. Now, this is really National 5 content. You don't really need to worry about it until next year, but we can't really talk about photosynthesis without mentioning it. So our chloroplasts have got something called chlorophyll in them, and that's a green pigment. That's what makes leaves green. That's what absorbs the light energy from the sunlight and is able to convert that and allows us to break up our carbon dioxide and our water. So once we've broken up that carbon dioxide and water, we're going to convert it into glucose and oxygen. So glucose is a type of sugar that can be used by the plant for food and a couple of other things that we'll come on to shortly. However, oxygen is just a waste product. It's going to diffuse out of the leaves and into the atmosphere. So, quick reminder, can you remember what's happening in the stages of photosynthesis? What are our raw materials? What are our products? You should know that we've got carbon dioxide and water and our raw materials. We need light energy absorbed in the chlorophyll, and that produces glucose and oxygen. Now, obviously, if you look at a tree or a plant, it's not just made of glucose. It's actually going to use that glucose to produce the other components that a tree or a plant might need for some kind of growth. So a simple glucose molecule, this one here, can be combined with others in different forms to form perhaps starch, which could be as a storage molecule. So potatoes, for example, the tubers made there are just made of starch, so they are just really starchy molecules fully made of glucose all stuck together. However, the glucose can also be stuck together to form a more structural molecule known as cellulose, and that's going to form things like the roots and the shoots of the plant. Now, photosynthesis itself as an overall process can occur either quicker or slower depending on the particular conditions. And when we think about what might slow down the rate of photosynthesis, then we're really thinking about the things that are going into photosynthesis. So the things that are actually letting it happen. So obviously, if we don't have enough carbon dioxide, photosynthesis will slow down. If we don't have enough water, photosynthesis will slow down. However, the amount of water that you need in photosynthesis is actually very, very small. You only really need a few water molecules at a time for each reaction of photosynthesis. And consequently, the plant normally can access enough water. So it's really an issue that water will slow down photosynthesis. We also need to have enough light energy coming into the plant, or photosynthesis will slow down. And finally, we also need to consider temperature. So temperature is going to be quite important for allowing all of the enzymes that are operating to create photosynthesis to happen at the right speed. So if it's not warm enough, those enzymes are going to slow down and the reaction won't happen properly. So these are referred to as limiting factors, things that will slow down photosynthesis. And the main three are carbon dioxide, light intensity, or the amount of light energy that we're getting, and the temperature. Now, when we try and measure how fast photosynthesis is happening in a lab, obviously it's all happening within the leaves of the plant. You can't see it occurring. But we can think about what's being produced. So we can think about the glucose being produced, and we can think about the oxygen being produced. Now, as I've mentioned before, if you are looking to see whether or not photosynthesis has actually happened, you can test a leaf for starch by doing an iodine test. So you're going to boil off your leaf and you're going to apply a little bit of iodine to it. If the iodine changes colour, then we know starch has been produced and then photosynthesis has occurred. That, however, doesn't tell us how fast photosynthesis has happened. It just tells us that we've produced some kind of starch. So in order to see how fast photosynthesis has happened, you can measure how much oxygen is being produced in a certain amount of time. And we can do that with aquatic plants. Now we're going to need an aquatic plant because we need to be able to put it into water, like in this setup here. So we've got our little plant here down at the bottom of the beaker. Set up a filter funnel over the top of it and a test tube. And the up-ended test tube, we're simply just collecting the bubbles in there, and we're looking to see how much gas is able to displace that water over a certain period of time. So the more bubbles you get, the more oxygen the plant is producing, therefore photosynthesis is happening at a faster rate. And when you look at the limiting factors and their effects on the rate of photosynthesis, we can do this via a couple of graphs like these ones. So if this is how much light the plant is getting, and this is how fast photosynthesis is occurring, or how quickly the bubbles are coming off the bottom of our plant, as we get more light, the speed of photosynthesis increases. So if it's really dark, there's no photosynthesis. If we give it a little bit more light, it gets a bit faster. If we give it a little bit more light, it gets a bit faster, and so on. However, once we get to a certain point, there's enough light, there is enough energy, there's only so many chlorophyll pigments that can actually absorb that energy, and once they're all full up, if you like, we don't need any more. And increasing the light intensity, so giving it more light, doesn't actually make it any faster. So consequently, at this point, increasing light intensity is having no effect on the rate, so the limiting factor must be something else. It must be either carbon dioxide or temperature. Similarly, if we look at our carbon dioxide graph, if we increase the concentration of carbon dioxide, we're looking at how fast the photosynthesis is happening. As we're increasing it, we see photosynthesis getting faster and faster and faster up until a certain point where it can't absorb any more CO2. All the CO2 is being used and the plant's busy making sugar using that carbon dioxide. So there's something else that's having an effect on the rate of photosynthesis. So it must be light or temperature. And finally, our temperature graph is a little bit different. So as we increase temperature, again, the rate of photosynthesis is going to increase. If it's very cold, freezing, there's no photosynthesis taking place. As we let it get a little bit warmer, the rate of photosynthesis speeds up. So we get more and more photosynthesis as we get to a certain point. However, as was said, the enzymes that are involved in photosynthesis that are carrying out the different reactions, they're going to operate best at a temperature of around 35 to 40 degrees. After that, when we get to about 45 degrees, plant enzymes are what we call denatured. Essentially, that sort of means they melt, their shape changes, and they can't operate anymore. So as a result, instead of it just leveling off and staying the same, this graph is actually going to come to a complete halt. Photosynthesis will stop completely when it gets too hot. So there's a few key questions you should be able to do from this. So it is up to you today how you're going to do those. You can either copy these down into your jotter and send me in a photo on Google Classroom so that I can mark them for you. Or you will see that I've created another little document for you, and it'll look just like this one, and all you need to do is open it up, and you should be able to click inside each little box and type your answers in there. And again, you just hit submit when you're done, and that will come through to me and I'll be able to mark that for you. If there's any problems with that, just leave me a little note on Google Classroom, please. Thank you very much, third year, and I hope to see you soon.